Hello, everyone. Welcome. Going live to talk about one of the most controversial topics in nutrition, which is super exciting for me. So, if you have ever been someone that has either been told you need to eat more protein or you've been confused about all of the noise surrounding nutrition, you're in the right spot. Because right now we're going to talk about everything concerning protein and why this is something you should not be focusing on if you're trying to heal. And we're going to break it down. We're going to get into the science and we're really going to talk about it. I'm going to drop some truth bombs on how I went from low carb and suffering, being in pain every day, to high carb and getting my life back, thriving, getting time back with my boys, enjoying time with my friends, working on and building a business that I never thought I would have been able to do a few years ago because I was in so much pain on a daily basis. Something else I want to throw out there is, we've been on a high protein, low carb kick as a nation for decades, and yet people are only getting sicker. They're only ending up in more and more pain with more and more medication, more doctor's visits. So, what's going on here? In fact, a recent study actually informed us that nearly half of all children born in 2019 would spend at least 50% on their life on a minimum of one prescription medications. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not something that I want for my kids. So comment kids if you want your kids to be healthy, to avoid all of these things that we're heading into. Okay? Just so you guys know, I have been having trouble seeing who is here live. There, I pulled this up. So I see a couple of you are in there. Drop a comment below. It's not showing up on my live feed on Facebook, so I have to open my phone. But drop a comment below if you're live. Let me know who's in here and hanging out with us. And let me know what you've heard about needing protein, because chances are in this day and age, you've probably been told you just need more protein. Eat more protein. Are you getting enough protein? It is definitely a common question. And it's something, even a few years ago, I struggled with getting enough fiber and vegetables. Working with a personal trainer, I was getting all of the protein, eating protein multiple times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. But my health was going to hell in a handbasket. So if you're eating protein and you're wondering why nothing is getting better, let me know, because you're not alone, okay? So what we want to do here in this group is clear up all the noise around nutrition and how we can actually heal. So first, we'll start with the basics. What is protein and where does it come from? So protein comes from a variety of foods, plants, but even fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. All of these things have protein, but we most commonly think of protein as being specifically meat, right? And that's just not the case. In fact, it's actually a myth that plants don't have all of the essential amino acids, but we're going to talk about that. So protein is actually broken down into amino acids, and that's what the body uses. We can't use big hunks of protein. It has to be completely broken down so the body can have the individual building blocks, those individual amino acids, and then it rebuilds where it needs from there. So there are 20 amino acids, 11 of which our body can produce, and 9 that are deemed essential, which means we have to get it from our food. So I want to ask you, and if you're watching the replay, type below as well. Let me know what's going on. Let me know what your thoughts are. But have you ever heard of an actual protein deficiency? Do you know what the name is? Because chances are most of us haven't. And the name for it is kwashiorkor. Okay? That is the scientific name for protein deficiency. And the reason we haven't heard of it is because it doesn't happen in industrialized countries. Okay? This happens when people are severely malnourished, starving. These are the environments where protein deficiency actually occurs. But yet, if you were to talk to anyone, any health guru in the industry, or maybe even your doctor, you would think that we're running around deficient of protein. And unfortunately, fortunately, that's just not the case. But we are so misinformed about protein these days, and we really need to clear the air. In fact, Americans get 2 to 3 times the recommended, not even the recommended amount, but the amount of protein that they actually need. And our diets are actually too high in protein and fat and not high enough in fiber, phytochemicals, phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals. So, where did all of this information come from? So first and foremost, the government actually is the one that tells us what our recommended daily allowances are, right? So they tell us how much of X vitamin or mineral or protein that we should be getting. And what they found is that protein that is used not only for muscle, but to create hormones, to create immune cells, so on and so forth, we only need 0.36 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. If you did the math, for me personally at 159 pounds, I would need 25 grams of protein a day. That's it for my body to perform its natural functions. But yet what we see online and everybody's telling us, get your 100, 125, 150 grams of protein today. And it's just not necessary. And we'll get into it a little bit more later and I'll show you exactly why. But back to the daily recommendations. So who sets these recommendations? What we need is 0.36 grams of protein, but the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee is a panelist of 20 individuals, and they're the ones that actually set the guidelines for the United States. So I forget exactly what year it was when they came out with the 0.36 for our minimum requirements. They rounded it up to 0.4 and then doubled it and said if every American gets 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, they're going to be fine. Pretty much everyone is covered, which is awesome, right? So we're already taking care of knowing that 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is exactly what we need. But what's interesting, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the 0.8, but just to note, the DGAC, there was an investigation in 2020 that revealed 95% of its members had at least one conflict of interest with food or pharmaceutical industries, including dairy, meat, and egg. Okay, so they have a vested interest in promoting animal products and things that lead to pharmaceuticals. So there is a revolving door between government and industry, and there is, something to be noted there. But in any event, we have had so much marketing around protein that we are completely ignoring some of the negative effects of protein on our health and also what we're leaving out when we focus on low carb, high protein diets. So I want to talk about a couple myths real quick before we get into the nitty gritty. So one of the primary myths that we've believed over the years originated in the 1970s from a book but called A Diet for a Small Planet. And this led to the belief that plants are not complete proteins, meaning we have to jump through nutritional hoops to get enough protein from plants. And this has since been retracted and also found to be completely untrue. And what they've found is that all plants, even fruit, has all 20, which includes all 9, of the essential amino acids. Okay? So we are getting all of our amino acids without crazy combinations of different plant foods. So as long as we're getting enough calories and eating enough amino acids overall, we're getting enough protein without needing to add excessive amounts or eat protein specific products or needing animal products. So that is myth number 1. Like I also said, there are financial ties to industry that are also a consideration, right? So there is a vested interest in promoting high quality, is what they used to be, what it's typically deemed, protein. When in reality, plant proteins are just as high quality. We get everything that we need from them without the negative effects. So another thing that's huge when we talk about protein or talk about any sort of plant-based diet is B12. Okay, this is huge, and this is actually something that I learned a few years ago. I was completely ignorant to the fact that B12 is not created by animals. So humans don't create it, cows don't create it, farm animals, they're not creating it. B12 is actually a byproduct of a bacteria in the soil. So that's where it actually comes from. In a perfect world where we didn't have depleted soil and the agricultural situation that we're in, we would be getting our B12 from our food from the ground that has these microbes on it, right? We don't have that anymore, and thus we eat animal protein to get our B12, or we supplement, right? What people don't realize is that just as humans are having issues with B12, animals are as well. So the majority of farmed animals that are used for human consumption, especially factory farmed animals where they're not regenerative, they're not roaming, they are supplemented with B12. They are getting a supplement because they're not ingesting the microbes that produce B12. So the animals are still getting a B12 supplement. So a lot of people think, well, if you don't have animal sources of protein, you're not getting B12, but you're just taking the supplement that they took as well, right? So it's a huge misconception. Another misconception is that B12 deficiency is only common in people that are solely plant-based, when in fact, about 40% of the Western population is bordering deficiency. So they're not quite deficient yet, but about 1 in 20 people are, and it's even worse as you age. So those over 60 years old are B12 deficient. But it's interesting because only 1% of the population identifies as vegan, where theoretically this is where we view B12 deficiency to be the problem. So it's actually recommended that even if you're not on a plant-based diet, you take a high quality B12 supplement. All right. So those are a couple of the things as far as myths are concerned about protein. Hopefully that answered some questions for you guys. I want to talk real quick. My focus is not on physique here. My focus is on healing and what we need to do to heal our bodies and the nutrition that we need to take in and the nutrition that we need to leave out for optimal healing. But it is interesting, and I was actually on a bodybuilding Facebook group the other day, just perusing, I don't know why, and a woman posted a before and after photo, and she had not made any progress. And evidently the time lapse had been 3 years working with a personal trainer, 2 to 3 times a week. And she was asking for suggestions. And it's interesting because about half the comments, and there were several comments, where you need to eat more protein. But we don't know how much protein she was eating. She could have been eating protein all day. Protein in itself does not build muscle. So a lot of people think if I just eat more protein, I'll be able to build more muscle. Muscle is only formed when we put that muscle under stress, it tears down and it has to rebuild. Okay? If we are not doing strength training exercises, eating more protein is not going to help. So I left a very informative comment to help that person. We need to take into things into consideration like progressive overload, frequency of training, so on and so forth, not just eat more protein. But it's interesting because that is the primary focus, and it's the first thing that comes to mind when we're talking about anything physique related. So we talked a lot about what protein is, what kind of myths are out there. But let's talk about the effects of high protein, low carb diets. And listen, I was someone that, like I said, my personal trainer could not get me to eat vegetables or fruit. She was like, just eat an apple. This was a few short years ago. I was like, no. I had my turkey slices. I had eggs for breakfast. I was high protein all day long. Not nearly enough fiber at all. But any event, one of the things is feeling tired. So if you're someone that cannot live without your coffee, raise your hand. That was me. I had a pre-workout in the morning. After that, for breakfast, 2 cups of coffee. And then around lunchtime, I hit a major slump and had either another cup or 2 or a double espresso, which I really enjoyed doing, but it was terrible for my health and for my nervous system. And then I would want to crash at dinner time. Had no idea why I was so tired, because I was burning myself out on caffeine and I was not giving myself energy that I needed from carbohydrates, because that is our body's preferred fuel source. So if we are not fueling our body with foods that are going to energize it, we are going to feel tired. Okay? Something else that happens, if our body does not have enough carbohydrate energy, it will actually break down protein. It's a process called gluconeogenesis, and it is not efficient. So it actually takes energy to break down amino acids, turn it into glucose, so we have glucose available for energy, when we could just be fueling our body with the whole food carbohydrate energy that it's craving. So if you're tired, you're sluggish, you're worn down, try giving it some natural energy, okay? Something else that happens, healing slows down, okay? Why does this happen? We need glucose for cellular regeneration, for immune system activation, for our liver to function properly, which has over 500 functions, and detoxification is part of those functions, but your liver requires glucose. It actually stores glucose as well, so when glucose stores get low for the brain, it can release it into the bloodstream. So without carbohydrates, healing stalls because the body lacks the fuel that it needs to rebuild, okay? We don't have that energy. And it's interesting, kind of going back to athleticism and physique. In sports nutrition, they train you not to modify protein intake unless you're bodybuilding and you have to have that demand. But for the average person doing regular exercise and movement, it's not necessary. What they tell you and what they train you is to modify your carbohydrates. So the more output you put in, you want more carbohydrate energy, not protein, because they know we need that energy. in the form of carbs. Okay? This is kind of embarrassing, but a lot of people are dealing with constipation these days. And you know what? Talking about poop is part of my job. It's part of something I love because a healthy bowel movement is part of overall health, okay? I had chronic IBS-C for so long, okay? It got worse and it finally got better when I stopped focusing on protein. Because one of the reasons protein keeps you fuller longer is because it takes longer to digest. It's harder on the digestive system. It's not a benefit to stay fuller longer if you're eating the right foods. If you're eating healthy foods, there's no reason that you need to limit how frequently you eat. In any event, the reason it takes longer, it keeps you fuller longer, is it's harder to digest, it's harder to break down, but things move more slowly. And what happens when things are not moving through the GI tract? We end up feeding pathogenic bacteria in our gut, okay? So our gut needs those beneficial microbes to help. They help regulate our immune system, our gut, our digestion, our hormones, our levels of inflammation. So these things are huge, and we want to keep these little gut bugs happy. When we are not giving them high fiber, high carbohydrate foods, things slow down, and it leads to gut dysbiosis, which has a whole host of negative effects. Okay. If you're tracking with me, let me know. Leave me a comment below what your thoughts are. If you have any questions, I'll try to keep an eye on the comments. If you're watching the replay, thank you. Sandra, Amanda, I see you. I hope this is valuable for you guys so far. So we're going to go through a few other things. Hormones and blood sugar. So a lot of the time we think women need protein because it helps with hormone balance, protein, fat, but what they're missing is that glucose is part of that picture. Carbohydrate energy is essential for hormone regulation, especially for women. When we do not have adequate carbohydrate energy and we're focused on protein and fat, it can lead to thyroid suppression, low T3 levels, increased cortisol, worsening of insulin resistance, and things like PCOS and other female-related issues. So we often think of making sure we're having that protein and fat, but we're missing out on the carbs, right? I'm kind of going to skim over some other things. I don't want to get too in the weeds because we are focusing on healing, but some things to note: when we have really high levels of protein, it actually, so when we're strength training and things, protein helps the muscles grow, right? It also helps other things grow, tumors, cancer. And what happens is there's a couple pathways that this takes. So one of these things is activation of the IGF-1 pathway, and this is insulin-like growth factor. This actually fuels cancer cells. Okay, it's been associated with elevated risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancers, and there's actually a 2014 study that showed that adults ages 50 to 65 who consume high amounts of protein had a 4-fold increase in cancer mortality. Okay, this effect was largely attributed to elevated IGF-1 levels. This is often overlooked, and it's super important, okay? Just because we do need protein doesn't mean that we need excessive amounts. There is too much of a good thing. Another thing that gets activated is something called the mTOR pathway. We're not going to go super far into it, but leucine, which is it's usually in branched chain amino acid supplements, and it's something that people take regularly. It triggers cell growth and proliferation, and it's been linked to cancers including liver, kidney, breast, and colon cancer. So we're flooding our body with all of um, this protein that we don't need, and in excess is actually proving to be harmful. But unfortunately, most of us aren't given that information. So just want to share, where we need to be as far as worrying about protein, and we don't need to be worrying about it. So what happens when we focus on protein and not carbohydrate rich foods? So we end up with things that are deficient, such fiber, potassium, magnesium, phytonutrients, and antioxidants. These guys are the ones that are going to protect from cellular damage, protect from DNA damage, help regulate tumor growth and things like that. Vitamin C deficiency. Vitamin C is only found in plant foods. So we need to be getting that in. So we're getting that vitamin. It is a powerful antioxidant, but it's also imperative for skin health, joint health, and recovery from injuries, as well as helping the immune system when we have a cold or something like that. So there are some other deficiencies that we can talk about, but I will leave it at that. If anybody has any specific questions about it, please let me know. Shoot me a message. I think that's pretty much it. Those were the big hitters. For sake of time, just want to cut it off there. But we could go down so many rabbit holes with this, and it's just because there's so much noise when it comes to healing and protein and what we really need to be focusing on. So if you're stuck and you're just confused about nutrition, you can book a call and we can chat. But really, if you're tired of elimination diets and playing games with your health and really not making any forward steps, let's connect, let's chat. We can try to develop a plan for you, and if it doesn't work out, that's fine. We can part ways, no big deal. But I really want to help support you and give you the information that you need. So you can always shoot me a message or go to the website. But I hope that this was informative to you. Next, we're going to be doing a 3-part series on insulin resistance. So I haven't talked about insulin resistance and diabetes since November, before the group was active. So I'm really excited. The dates for those will be coming up soon, so join me for that. I'm going to share all the truths on insulin resistance and how we can reverse diabetes. So thank you for joining. Sandra, Amanda, thank you. For anybody that watched the replay, thank you so much. If you have questions, let me know, and I hope you have a great weekend.